Hi, good afternoon to all of you from Manila. Welcome to this session on managing for resilience. I am Priyantha Vijayatunga from ADB South Asia Energy Division. I have my co-moderator Charles and Rogers. This particular session is on improving management capacity can increase the reliability and resilience of the energy supply in the most, of course, economic and efficient manner. And this resilience can be achieved by taking proactive measures, introducing emergency plan and working procedure, enhancing coordination and synergy with other public service departments, etc. And of course, this will allow revival of the systems in case of emergencies or contingencies. So this session will mainly focus on, under track 4, will mainly focus on energy management related knowledge, practice, sharing between countries, electric utilities, and other energy service enterprises. Let me now invite Charles to make a few remarks before I take over to start the presentations. Charles.
Great, thank you very much, Priyantha. I'm Charles Rogers, and I'm Senior Advisor to the Asian Development Bank in the area of climate change adaptation. I want to just sort of preface the session by making a few remarks about resilience, how that plays into what we're going to hear. By the way, are you hearing me properly? Okay, very good, thanks. So in the engineering profession, at least, we talk a lot about specific characteristics of resilience, and the focus tends to be on the reliability of systems. We talk, for example, about the capacity to resist or withstand shock or stress. We talk about the capacity to accommodate shock or stress. This is essentially, I think, the sense of resilience that most people are most familiar with, the ability to continue to deliver essential services in the face of some degradation. A third characteristic might be the capacity to recover quickly from a shock or stress. And finally, the capacity to change or adapt in response to new challenges. And this sort of encompasses the whole build back better paradigm. And the conventional view is, at least in the engineering world, is that these are design attributes. For example, the capacity to resist reflects freeboard or some degree of over-design in the face of uncertainty. Possibly the capacity to accommodate arises from redundancy or diversification of systems, presence of buffers, and so forth and so on. And we'll actually hear a little bit about these determinants of resilience in some of the presentations. However, resilience is not solely an attribute of technology systems and physical design, although these are clearly important. Even a well-designed and engineered system still requires sound, innovative, and agile management, since, among other reasons, one of the primary characteristics of shock and stress is that they require active and creative management responses. And the recent and ongoing COVID pandemic actually serves to highlight this. Some countries have been extremely effective in limiting the spread and mortality of the virus through innovative and agile management response, while others have suffered terribly due to poor management decisions. And please note that all have had access to basically the same set of technologies in doing so. So the importance of management cannot be overstressed. Now, with respect to energy systems, which often embody very large accumulations of investment over time, think here of a national grid or something like that, improving management capacity may be among the most efficient, rapid, and cost-effective means to increase the reliability and resilience of the energy supply. And many of the most effective steps you've already heard Priyantha describe. Proactive measures including emergency plans, work procedures, enhanced coordination, and among others, as we've seen in the pandemic, the capacity to reallocate resources quickly and efficiently between locations and purposes. So this session will focus on energy management related knowledge and practice sharing between countries, electric utilities, and other energy service enterprises. We'll also hear about the importance of planning, policy design, as well as a bit about technology itself through the presentations in this session, which I find to be very very interesting and very informative. So with that, I will turn it back over to you.
Yeah, Charles, thank you very much for that elaborate introduction to the session and the issues involved. Thank you very much. Let's now quickly go into the first presentation. First presentation is going to be on rethinking electric utility resource planning in renewable rich environment by Sumedh Agarwal, manager, Trilemma. Let me hand over to Sumedh. Sumedh, you are muted still. Yeah, please go ahead.
Is it audible now?
Yeah, it is. Yes, please go ahead.
Thank you, Priyanta, for your generous introduction. Greetings, good morning, good afternoon, and good evening, ladies and gentlemen. It feels nice to join here and connect with everyone virtually. Today, I'm going to deliver this presentation, which stems from the fact that higher shares of renewable energy requires new planning approaches to our energy system and manage the disruption in a more resilient way. So I will talk about what is resource planning and why is it so important for utilities to rethink their existing planning practices. I will mention the significant work that has been currently undertaken by USAID in partnership with Indian Ministry MNRE for bringing efficiency into traditional utility planning processes, and will also share recommendations that has come up as an outcome to this work so that utilities become capable to absorb more renewable in their portfolio. What is resource planning? I mean, this is an important slide and I will spend a minute here. So honorable attendees, resource planning is a process that distribution companies use to select the supply to meet the electricity demand of their consumers on a long-term basis. Question is why it is done? Because supply side resources are capital intensive and have long life. Their planning has a significant impact on the finances of distribution companies. Three main attributes of resource planning include demand forecasting, generation resource mapping, and developing optimized resource portfolio. In fact, good resource planning is the foundation of good demand forecasting, and demand forecasting is most of the times overestimated and underestimated. I would like to highlight this graph which attests the importance of it. In blue bars, you can see the forecasted demand by a utility in India, and in red bars, we have the actual demand which has been observed in 2018 and 2019. You can notice that the demand far outstripped the real demand to the tune of 35% last year. Such overestimations have resulted in over-procurement and a cost burden of around $232 million, which ultimately was borne by consumers in form of tariff. The issue is common with many utilities across South Asian region, and I'm sure it leaves an enough reason for participants to contemplate its impact. So finally, what it means is that resource plan basically results in power procurement. And what we are talking today is basically accounting to 60 to 70% of the total cost of supply for electric distribution utilities. The savings on resource plan can result in energy security and reduce consumer tariff. Even a 10% reduction in power purchase cost by a utility can lead to a saving of $73 million on conservative basis. And this reduction is possible because there are three developments which are impacting DISCOM resource planning. These include falling prices of RE, DSM measures, and technology. Let me discuss each of them in detail. First development is that there has been an unprecedented fall of renewable energy prices across region and especially India, converting it into a RE powerhouse. As you can see on the right-hand bar graph, there is a sharp deceleration in the capacity addition of thermal over past few years. In year 2019, 75% of the new capacity addition came from renewables, and it outpaced the conventional capacity addition. And this was because of the cost reduction of key renewable technologies, wind and solar, which now are roughly around 3.3 cents per unit or even lesser. So in short, we are at a stage where RE is ready to scale and hence requires a better understanding of the load curve to take it forward and support integration. The coordinates of second development point towards rise of new and non-traditional impacts of DSM, DER, and demand response. These offer ways to modulate and control demand curve and hence can be implemented at customer side, affecting his consumption and load patterns. I would like to show you a classic case in state of Karnataka in India, a state roughly of a size of Senegal, reflected in the second column chart. For Karnataka, irrigation load was almost 1/3 of state energy requirement, and that load has been shifted during solar generation time, and this has reduced power purchase costs significantly. Third important development is the possibility to better match variations in supply with demand across space-time. In fact, in the conventional world, planners used to focus on two numbers, peak and average demand. Demand was considered uncontrollable and supply was predictable as it was largely thermal. If demand was lower, thermal plants were backed down, and if it was higher, it was filled by peakers. If demand was still higher, then utilities resorted to load shedding. But with RE inclusion in the system, the planning now needs to be profile based and not only just two numbers, that is peak and average. And we in fact now have better techniques of forecasting and load shifting. I would like to show you a case study for a state in India and how better planning in RE-rich environment is helping utilities to take care of their finances. This is a resource optimization study for Karnataka, and the utility is serving around 20.6 million customers with a loss level of 14%. Karnataka observed a peak demand of 11 gigawatts in 2019, and the graph on the top actually shows the peak day, which was on 25th March 2019. The peak is largely met using thermal, which is shown in maroon color, and blue color, which is hydro as base load. In 2030, the state will observe a demand of around 19 gigawatts. And to meet the demand, the state must develop a resource plan, and it explored two capacity addition scenarios. One was the business as usual, and another was RE-rich scenario. Under business as usual, thermal was added to meet the peak demand, and no RE capacity addition was considered. This scenario leads to large surplus in non-summer season and add to the fixed cost of utility. The cost has come out to be around $2,400 million US. While in RE-rich scenario, thermal capacity was 50% and RE hydro and storage is introduced. Solar generation time is meeting the peak, as you can see in the green color, while hydro and storage are acting as a balancing reserve. And this has given three benefits to the state. There is no stranded asset created, which could have been in form of thermal. There is no system level grid securities issues observed with respect to scheduling and ramp ups. And there is a resultant saving of around 150 million per annum. So this gives us confidence that if we match demand and supply curve with better understanding of resource plan, we can actually reduce power purchase cost. I think time has come now to fill the existing gap by utilities and regulators, as resilience also requires detection of existing vulnerabilities. In terms of resource plan, we can see that methodology of forecasting and resource planning is more based on intuition and not granular. Most of the utilities still go by time series CAGR analysis without giving importance to econometric and more statistically better methods such as multivariate equations. It requires a revisit. There is no well-defined regulatory framework or pronounced methodology to examine 60 to 70% cost of distribution business, which needs a revisit again. A focused discussion on risk uncertainty management is needed to better capitalize on RE opportunities. Plans still now are made once in 5 years, and time has come for a periodic updates as planning cannot be done in silo in RE environment. And capacity building is something which is most needed to equip professionals with RE-dominated portfolio. In fact, towards addressing this, there is a significant work which has been done under USA Partnership to Advance Clean Energy Program 2.0. Last year, we released a white paper which received wide appreciation from central and state agencies. And now we are developing a tool which has the capability to support utilities with profile-based demand forecasting, generation planning, and least cost power procurement. The tool will be freely available for adoption in South Asian countries. There is an ongoing work on regulations, and we have drafted a regulation to support regulators and utility to examine the 60 to 70% cost of distribution business in terms of long-term and medium-term. And what we are saying, we are not just doing it on paper, but we have actually demonstrated the benefits and the results executed on the ground in 2 states of India, Jharkhand and Assam. Last but not the least, we are also developing an online certification program where utilities and regulators from South Asian countries can learn how to do resource planning. You can see here the actual results generated by the demand forecasting tool, which has been executed on ground. And it has now capabilities to forecast medium-term and long-term profiles on an hourly basis for up to next 20 years. And this tool is helping DISCOMs to identify the best renewable resource and its quantity with minimum grid integration cost. In fact, the tool was found very handy to predict the impact of COVID on medium term for the state of Assam. Finally, I would like to propose 5 recommendations to all my fellow men who are also undergoing a similar transformation in their respective countries. Time is changing, and it is important now to increase awareness of resource planning, frame regulatory framework for resource plans, and develop and utilize software tools. We need to bring risk and uncertainty management in more proactive way and build capacity of regulators, people, utilities at all levels. So thank you for your interest in listening to this presentation and patient hearing. I will be happy to take up questions during the panel session. So I hand over the control to Priyanta to take ahead the proceedings.
Thank you. Thank you very much, Sumed, for that excellent presentation. As you said, these are very good ideas, and it's quite interesting to see how most of, at least in utilities in our region, will take up because they have their own inertia, as you know very well. And demonstration is very important. I could see you some of the states. That's very encouraging. Let us now go into the next presentation. That's going to be on managing the energy trilemma in the Philippines. Presenter is Joseph Yap, Senior Technical Advisor of the Ateneo. With that short introduction, let me hand over to Joseph. Please go ahead.
Thank you very much, Priyanta. Good afternoon, everyone. This is the title of my presentation, Managing the Energy Trilemma in the Philippines. Allow me an opportunity to briefly acknowledge the organizers of ASAP 2020, my co-authors, members of the ASAP Cells project, and of course the European Union for providing financial support for the project. Okay, the objective of the paper is to present a methodology to manage the energy trilemma, which arises because of the inherent trade-offs that exist among the goals of energy policy. So here they're depicted as energy security, energy equity, and environmental sustainability of energy systems. And the definitions of the different concepts are also shown in this diagram. Just to give a clear example, roughly 10 years ago, when the cost of solar power, the cost of wind generation was very high, there was a clear trade-off between energy equity and environmental sustainability. Meanwhile, the World Energy Council in 2019 ranked the Philippines 94th out of 128 countries in managing the energy trilemma. The contribution of this paper, one of the contributions of this paper, is to sharpen the framework of showing the trade-offs and synergies among the energy goals. And we do this by redefining the energy trilemma along the expanded version of energy security given by the International Energy Agency. So the components of the trilemma based on this expanded version of energy security are autarky, which translates to self-sufficiency, price, which relates to affordability and indirectly to accessibility, supply, which we will define more clearly later on, and then sustainability, which is measured by carbon emissions. Okay. So another contribution of the paper is to provide a mechanism to manage the trilemma by providing that mechanism to evaluate policy options. And by the way, our definition of supply based on the Plexus software is capacity reserve margin, which is equal to the difference between total generation capacity and peak load as a share of peak load. So to operationalize that mechanism to manage the trilemma, what we do is specify a welfare function. Okay, so this welfare function is a combination of the four variables we mentioned earlier. So you have autarky, price, supply, and carbon emissions, each of which has a weight. Okay, so what we know is that different policy options will yield different values of the four variables, okay? And therefore different values of welfare. And it's quite straightforward to choose the policy option that yields the highest welfare. Okay, quite straightforward. But the problem is, how do you determine the parameters, alpha, beta, gamma, and delta? Okay, and we do that by recognizing that these parameters represent the revealed preference of the Department of Energy Secretary. And once we recognize that, we can readily apply the multi-criteria decision-making methodology. There are many of which to choose from, and one of them is the analytical hierarchy process. So just to give you a quantitative example of applying this analytical hierarchy process, we interviewed two energy experts. We consider them hypothetical Secretary 1, Department of Energy Secretary 1, and Department of Energy Secretary 2. And the interviews yielded these values of the parameters. And just to note that the actual relevant welfare functions specification is shown as follows. The reciprocal of P and carbon emissions are what enter the welfare function, because higher price and higher carbon emissions yield lower welfare. Okay. So the next step is to apply this in an exercise. We generated the values of the key variables. Again, autarky, price, supply, and carbon emissions. For this study, we used the Plexus software. The model that underlies the software actually shows the different trade-offs and synergies among these four variables. The time horizon is 2020 to 2040. Okay, so we generated two simulations. This is for autarky. Okay, it's same color. The yellow line shows the values of the simulation related to a market-based scenario. The blue line shows simulation results related to the imposition of a carbon tax, which is equivalent to 100% of social cost of carbon. So that's $40 in 2007 prices, per $40 per ton of CO2 emissions. So this is the result for autarky levels, and autarky rises as a result of the imposition of the carbon tax. Intuitively, the price rises as a result of the implementation of carbon tax. Nothing much about supply, but interestingly, carbon intensity declines, right? And it's also, again, consistent with intuition. Carbon intensity declines as a result of the imposition of a carbon tax. So how do you evaluate these two policies? You simply substitute the values of the four variables into the welfare function and use the parameters related to your hypothetical Secretary 1 and hypothetical Secretary 2. So there are three things that we highlight in these empirical results. First, you note that there is a secretary 3 that we identify. Second, you will note that for both secretary 1 and secretary 2, the value of the welfare function rises with the imposition of a carbon tax. For secretary 3, the welfare declines with the imposition of carbon tax. The third thing you have to note is that the value of the welfare function is higher. Okay, the value of the welfare function is higher in both the market-based scenario and the scenario with the carbon tax for secretary 3. Okay, so question number 1. How were the weights of secretary 3 obtained? Okay, these weights were obtained under using a simulation-based optimization approach, and therefore they are the weights that maximize welfare under the market-based scenario. So that's alpha star, beta star, gamma star, delta star. Okay. Second point, secretary 1 and secretary 2 will impose the carbon tax. Secretary 3 will not. Okay. Point number 3, which is actually a question: do the results indicate that secretary 3 should head the Department of Energy? As we pointed out, the value of the welfare function under both scenarios is higher for secretary 3. And the answer is not at all, because it's straightforward to imagine a scenario with another set of parameters and other values of the 4 variables that will yield a higher welfare. What we can point out is that the parameters simply reflect the preferences of society. So society elects the president appoints the Department of Energy secretary. The welfare function is a mechanism to rank the different policies given the parameters. But what the results indicate is that if society prefers a market-based approach, then the optimum set of parameters, which we showed earlier, are 0 for three parameters and 1 for the parameter for the variable that relates to price. Okay, so what is the future direction of the research related to this paper? First, what we can do is that given the parameters of W, okay, we can ask the question: what would be the values of autarky, price, carbon emissions, and supply that would maximize welfare? Okay, so given that you know the optimal values of those 4 variables, then you can identify policies that would generate these optimal values. A second area for future research is that we can incorporate accessibility directly. Accessibility being defined as the percentage of households that have access to electricity. A third line of research would be to link the simulation model, the Plexus simulation model, to economic variables like gross domestic product and poverty incidence to obtain a more comprehensive welfare function. Finally, we can demonstrate how greater energy efficiency will improve all components of energy security. And just to emphasize, what we presented is a methodology to manage the energy trilemma and not to resolve the energy trilemma. With that, my customary thank you. Terima kasih banyak-banyak.
Thank you very much, Joseph. Very interesting. And it's always good to have a model and some output so that the decision makers can take a look at it and get alternatives from, because otherwise you have to do this just off the cuff, and sometimes certain policy decisions may not really help at the end of the day. If you have numbers, if you have something to back, that really helps. Thank you very much. It's quite interesting. I haven't seen this kind of model before. So the next presentation is going to be on offshore wind, a UK experience and Asian opportunity. The presenter is Camilla Fenning, Director, Southeast Asia Climate and Energy Network and Program Director, Prosperity Fund, ASEAN Low Carbon Energy Program of the Government of the United Kingdom. Camilla, over to you.
Thank you, Priyantha, and it's great to be here today virtually. So I'd like to talk today about the UK's experience of offshore wind, the opportunities in Asia, and how the UK can support countries in this region to be similarly successful where there is offshore wind potential. And I'll show that building wind into the energy mix is a really important way to build energy sector resilience. Just to set the context before I go into my presentation, the UK is the world leader in offshore wind. We have more installed capacity than any other country, I think something like a third of global capacity. We have over 2,000 offshore turbines and the world's biggest offshore plant. In the UK, offshore wind powers the equivalent of 4.5 million homes annually. And costs have fallen by 50% over the last 5 years. So it's now the lowest cost option for the UK, cheaper than new gas and nuclear. Yes, the UK is windy, sometimes very windy, but we also have a large, shallow seabed, which is owned by Her Majesty the Queen. But our success is not just because of those conditions. Mother Nature does need a helping hand, and we also need clear, stable policies set by government, financial certainty, and expertise. So I've got a slight frozen screen here. Oh yeah, here we go, thank you. So I'm just going to briefly look now at the need for clear regulation from the start of the process in terms of competing for sites through to consents to build and operate, then grid connection for energy transmission once the turbines are built, and then contracts or auctions to provide certainty of sale at a known price. And the important point here is that each of these regulatory stepping stones is crucial, and if one is not functioning well, it makes it difficult, if not impossible, to take forward a wholly successful project. There needs to be a whole of economy approach for this resilience, policy, finance, technology, grid and supply chain, and I'll say a little bit more about finance later. So I'll talk in general terms about work the UK government has been doing in the Asia Pacific region to share our expertise in offshore wind, using the knowledge that we've built up in the UK over the last generations. And I'll then talk about a specific development programme and the capacity building support we are designing and rolling out in a number of ASEAN countries from now until 2022. So as you can see from the slide, we've got a number of key markets for offshore wind in this region. Taiwan at the moment is the most advanced, and we've been working with all the sectors necessary to pull together for offshore wind development, government, regulators, developers and suppliers, and using our expertise, as I've said, across the whole life cycle of the industry. We've got a lot of experts that we can bring in to support people building up expertise in this area, whether that's sort of practical challenges, regulatory challenges, or in terms of the policies that are needed to make this effective. Doing a lot of work through our Department for Trade. We can also provide long-term finance through our UK export finance, and with really fantastic repayment terms. I think it's up to 18 years for renewable energy and offshore wind projects, and that's available in most Asian currencies. Just as an example, that long-term finance supported the Formosa 2 offshore wind project in Taiwan, which was Taiwan's largest wind farm. And just in case if anybody's in any doubt as to the sort of potential in this region for offshore wind, there are places, lots of places in Asia which have got fantastic sort of wind potential. Just looking at this Bloomberg slide here, which shows that in 2020, wind installations across APAC are something like 4 gigawatts, but that looks likely to more than double to nearly 10 gigawatts in 10 years' time. So I think that just sort of shows the potential. So I'm going to talk a little bit now about the development programme that I run for the UK government. It's called the Prosperity Fund ASEAN Low Carbon Energy Programme. And it's working in particular with the Philippines, Malaysia, Myanmar, Vietnam, Thailand, and Indonesia. And we've just completed our first year of activity through our delivery partners, EY and the Carbon Trust. And we're providing policy support, technical assistance and capacity building, focusing in particular on two areas, green finance and energy efficiency. And under the green finance strand, a planned intervention over the next 2 years is to provide capacity building support for offshore wind in ASEAN in three main areas, which I've written on the slide here: financing of offshore wind farms, offshore grid, and domestic supply chain. And I'll just say just a little bit more about financing here, because that's a sort of critical part of the work that the programme is doing. As probably many of you all know, the UK set up the Green Investment Bank in 2012, which was staffed by financial experts, not civil servants, but was critical to the UK's initial push on offshore wind. And it's offshore wind created an innovative way to collect very deep pools of private capital, over £1 billion, to support green infrastructure projects. This de-risked offshore wind and was really the critical reason for the UK's success. And that has really sort of boosted our energy resilience in terms of the amount of wind that we now have on the grid at any one time. And we can provide a lot of really expert advice to do similar in the region, particularly through the low carbon energy programme. And then offshore grid and domestic supply chain areas, again, where the UK's got a huge amount of experience, and we can bring that to the region. Just summarising what I've said about the programme. This is what we're doing through the programme, but more widely, across the region, our missions, our embassies, our high commissions have got representatives from the Department for International Trade in them, and there'll be somebody there that you can talk to about renewable energy and offshore wind. We also have a number of climate and energy specialists throughout the region who can work with governments and companies to help scale up offshore wind in this region. And as I've mentioned, UKEF, UK Export Finance, we have a number of colleagues here in the region specifically working on UKEF that can support companies looking for that long-term finance. So to summarise, our development programmes can provide policy support, capacity building and technical assistance. And of course, this collaboration doesn't only help build up energy sector resilience, but obviously improves the environment and cuts greenhouse gas emissions as well. So I'm just going to share a final slide, and apologies for those who listened in to the COP26 envoy John Merton on Tuesday. He also showed this slide, but it's one from Bloomberg and I think it's worth sharing. This, I think, underlines the importance of wind power to build energy resilience. It shows the cheapest energy generation technology in a selection of countries, first in 2014 and then in 2019. And it shows that the cheapest energy generation technology for many in 2014 was coal. That includes a number of countries in Southeast Asia and Asia, and it includes the UK. I think at that stage in 2014, the UK was producing something like 35% of its energy from coal. But then if you look just a few years later, just last year, so many of the sort of coal ones have shifted over to renewables, to wind and solar. And it is now so many countries' cheapest source of energy generation, including the UK. And in fact, our coal now is nearly down to zero from 40% in 2012. And actually over the last couple of months, we went 67 days burning no coal at all, which is absolutely a record for the UK over the last 150 years. So I think that this shows that we are where we are in 2019. Even by this year, a number of countries are even now, wind is now cheaper than coal. And I think we think about what this list will look like, in 2022, 2024. I think the most energy resilient countries in this region will be those who have seized early the opportunities of renewables, including wind. And we look forward to working with any companies and governments that are trying to take those steps to further that process. Thanks very much.
Thank you. Thank you very much, Camilla, for that excellent presentation and the beautiful story of wind in the UK. That's fantastic. And I'm sure we will have a lot to learn from the UK, particularly in Asia Pacific region, where we have good wind resources, as you quite rightly showed. And also, I should acknowledge here the support the UK government provides us to the clean energy financing facility, which is always very well replenished by the UK government from time to time. And thank you very much for that excellent presentation and intervention.
Thank you.
Let's go into the last presentation on solar-powered water system and solar community. The presenter is Jijiang He, from Senior Technical Advisor from Tsinghua University, China. Jijiang, over to you. I think you are still muted. You can.
Okay. It's not me. Hi, everyone. I'm Jijiang He. I will introduce solar-powered water system and the solar eco community. My colleague Yang Liu and Haiyu Xie and I co-write the slides. We are the Tsinghua University Renewable Energy Promotes Ecosystem Restoration Project team. Irrigation is crucial for drought lands. Irrigation requires energy. As you know, in many areas of developing countries, power grids are unavailable, and diesel pumps for irrigation are expensive and heavily polluted. The power to drive the pump can come from the PV, no longer dependent on the power grid and the diesel engine. Solar pump and storage in the water tank for irrigation and drinking when there is sunlight. The solar pump system can be applicable to different scenarios, such as the lake, drilling well, and mountains, with the water head of the 10 meters, 50 meters, and 200 meters, respectively. The bigger the water head, the smaller the flux. Meanwhile, we know the factors affecting irrigation area, such as the underground water level, type of the crops, pumps capacity, irrigation technologies, and water sieving irrigation technologies. How much farmland can it irrigate? We do the simple simulation. For 1 square kilometer farmland, consisting of the 5 primary crops evenly, it demands about 500,000 cubic meter water, and 255 kilowatt solar panels can meet such demand or irrigation. More importantly, how many solar panels do we need for 1 hectare crops? So we see the below table 2.8 kilowatt solar panel can meet the irrigation of 1 hectare rice farmland. Then there is a descending order, 1.56 kilowatt solar for 1 hectare potato. What is the comparative economic analysis? From the left two figures, we can see the cost distribution over the lifespan of 20 years, which has 4 components: 1, initial cost; 2, operation and maintenance; 3, energy; 4, capital replenishment. For solar pump system, it has a higher initial investment, which is a barrier for the installation in the market. But in terms of the life cycle cost analysis, solar pump has a comparative advantage. It can be paid back within 3 years and more attractively. It has additional environmental benefits from the reduction of the carbon CO2. Let's introduce 2 cases. The first case is a solar pump for restoration on Aldous Desert is in China, where Mongolia. When the rainfall is over 300 mm per year, what can the solar powered water system do? In 2009, the first set of the 3 kilowatt solar pump were installed on the desert, meeting the demand of the 42 hectare metal cultivation. Meanwhile, combined with drip irrigation, this system can additionally meet the demand of the seeding irrigation for 23 hectare pine, with a survival rate of the more than 92%. This is case 2, solar water pump and agriculture in Zambia, in Africa. Similarly, in one case in Africa, Zambia, the installation of the 3.2 kilowatt solar panel can support the irrigation of the 4.5 acre for diversified vegetable and drinking water for 4,000 broiler chicken. 4,000 chicken. They're very good. This product comes from the China, from China solar pump. Next problem: how could people in no electricity community solve this challenge? The challenge. No electricity community, that's some challenge. Yeah. Many face many challenges, like lacking public health service and being exposed to disease, education issues, no clean water, limited access to affordable and clean energy. These challenges are closely related to the United Nations Sustainable Development Goals, SDG 3, SDG 4, 6, and 7. How could people solve these challenges and improve their livelihood? Solar energy could give this answer, as in my book. In the community where the power grid is expensive and unavailable, a solar panel could bring clean energy and breathing life. A solar panel with only 0.7 square meter will generate 150 kilowatt hour a year in Africa, especially in Africa, which can meet a person's basic electricity consumption for 1 year. All right, we could use the energy stored by solar battery during the day. There is no sunlight at night. For a family with 4 people, a couple of the 2 children with basic household applications like TV, phone, radio. What is their daily electricity consumption is about 300 kilowatt hour a day or less. Maybe only 1 or 2 solar panels can support the family's daily life. Now let's see an upgraded scenario. A family with computer, refrigerator, e-bicycle, or and a motorcycle. What is the daily electricity consumption? It's about 1 kilowatt hours, 1,000 kilowatt hours a day, or 1 kilowatt hour. This means less 1 kilowatt solar panel can guarantee a family's convenience life. Solar energy could also bring changes to sanitation and public health in communities. In public health and sanitation, as I mentioned briefly above, there is limited clean drinking water, limited access to healthcare service, and medical facility. Through the use of the solar energy, we will have solar water purification, solar venting refrigerator, and even solar clinic to solve the challenge in public health. And then a health community come, maybe can solve the COVID-19 the less. Solar energy can also be used for agriculture production. Let's see some solar power agriculture facility. Solar insecticidal lamp, solar pump for irrigation, and a solar freezer, The use of the solar energy in agriculture production, processing, and storage has increased the agricultural value chain. The e-commerce of agriculture product further extends the value chain, which goes beyond space constraint. So let's discuss how the developed country finance the solar-powered irrigation system and the solar eco community. The photo is a case of the SPIS project in Bangladesh, funded by ADB. The cost of the PV has dropped significantly compared to the last decade. The cost of the SPIC system has been thus greatly reduced, and its cost effectiveness has been significantly improved. The percentage of the grant will drop down, making access to finance easily. For the ecological public goods, such as SPIS, especially establish a measurable market mechanism is important. Giving a relatively high capital investment cost for solar powered irrigation, access to finance and financial service is crucial. We recommended this solution as follows. Financial leasing company by SPIS from the vendor in bulk and access loan from the bank. Second, SPIS are leased to cooperative with several farmers or individual farmers by FLC. 3, farmers pay small monthly installments during the growing season and more after the harvest. 4, government subsidy. to farmer and FLC. Maybe this solution is interesting or can to try. Oh, thank you. I need your feedback. This is my email. Yeah, thank you. Thank you very much. Thank you, everybody.
Thank you. Thank you. Thank you very much, Zhijiang. Very interesting presentation, and we have some experience of solar powered water systems and solar communities in Asia Pacific region. But I'm sure we can discuss this further during the panel discussion. Before we really move on to the panel discussion, let me request Robert to have an intervention because he is not presenting, but a panelist. It's good to have an intervention from you to start out the panel discussion. Robert, over to you.
Thank you so much, Mian-Tan. A pleasure to be here. As you can see, I speak to you from outer space, but it seems my Wi-Fi is holding, so we'll hope for the best. I wanted to spend a few minutes before we go into the open discussion and the Q&A with the audience about building the energy sector resilience through blended finance. I work for an organization called Convergence, which is the global network for blended finance. We generate data in that field, intelligence and deal flow, to increase private sector investment in developing countries. That's agnostic, not just clean and renewable energy or energy efficiency or climate finance. It's really any type of investment opportunities that are aligned with the Sustainable Development Goals. Last but not least, we also do market acceleration. Our design funding program awards grants for the design of innovative vehicles that aim to attract private capital to global developments at scale. And in fact, there is currently a window open from the DFED-funded Indo-Pacific infrastructure window for grants for resilience and sustainable infrastructure with a gender equality lens. So the deadline is August 10. That work for us is incredibly important because it allows us to basically nudge new ideas, new projects, facilities, platforms into being, in the hope that these, of course, will manage to attract private sector capital at scale. So just to get everybody on the same page, blended finance we define as the use of catalytic capital from either public or private or philanthropic sources to increase private sector investment in sustainable development. Why is that important? Certainly these days, in the wake of the COVID-19 pandemic, GDP growth has been shrinking very fast in many countries. Certainly in Asia will turn negative, so there's a tightening fiscal leeway for public sector expenditure. So this would be a fantastic time to use whatever fiscal space is still available in the public sector much more strategically. And that's where blended finance may come in as an opportunity and a challenge to scale up very, very significantly. And just specifically on clean energy, talking a bit about trends before I sort of put it out into the larger audience and the Q&A, a lot has already happened in the space of climate finance and clean energy in terms of blended finance. Again, the strategic use of public and/or philanthropic sources of capital to mobilize private sector capital. We've been following and basically taking stock of blended finance activity since 2010. Convergence got started at the UN SDG meeting in Addis Ababa in 2016. And we know that in the aggregate, about 160 deals have been done in clean energy worth about $40 billion. All in terms of clean energy by way of blended finance formats. Solar actually takes the cake at 52% of those deals. Most of them are done through projects or funds, much less so companies, bonds, notes, or facilities. They tend to be larger than other transactions in blended finance, anywhere between $50 to $250 million, and gratifyingly between South Asia and East Asia and other parts of Asia. We add it all up. It's about a 40% of global volume and blended finance in clean and renewable transactions. Of course, there are lots of different approaches to blend finance. There are opportunities to do guarantees, very often first loss guarantees, risk insurance, grants, as we do out of conversions ourselves, the application of all sorts of technical assistance funds. But about 79% of blending in the clean energy sector actually happens through concessional capital. So capital that's either longer than market or less costly than market, to make sure that the transaction ultimately gets done or is available at lower price points for lower or lowest income customers in whatever geography is concerned. You'll ask, who are these investors in blended finance and clean energy? We're happy to report that's essentially the entire spectrum, from multilateral development banks and bilateral financial institutions to development agencies, donor funds. There are a great number of philanthropic investors involved. The top three is the Shell Foundation, the Packard Foundation, Dune, Meteor, Rockefeller. There are many private investors also involved, particularly banks, and increasingly impact investors. So the full spectrum of institutional investors are active now in blended finance, bringing clean and renewable energy and climate finance more generally to the fore. And what I would submit to you that is now at this point, in the wake of COVID-19 and the economic crisis, it'd be a great time and a wonderful opportunity to scale that up. I'll leave my comments at that, Priyanta, and I'll let you manage the Q&A from here.
Yeah, thank you very much, Robert, for that very interesting angle from financing viewpoint. That's a good start for the panel discussion. In fact, I have a question from one. From the younger generation, I must say. Now, this, COVID-19 has impacted all over the world, of course, particularly the countries in our region, which really need a lot of help. And as you quite rightly said, the GDP growth have, almost halved and sometimes negative, and that's going to be a big issue. And the question is, with these issues in these particularly developing member countries, their focus might be shifted from all these commitments to clean energy to something else, and the priorities might change. And what kind of advice, starting from Camilla, I may ask, what kind of advice as a government official you can give to kind of make it a little more stronger, the focus stronger on the clean energy in a situation like this? Or as a development partner, for instance, UK government, bilateral donor, what kind of things, what you can do to these countries to make sure that they continue to focus on their commitments on clean energy? Over to you, Camilla, to start off. Others also can come in. Yeah.
Thank you very much. Yeah, I mean, this is a really important question, and certainly something that the British government and governments across the world are looking at. In the UK, there's a lot of talk about green recovery and building back better, growing back greener, all those kind of expressions. I've seen that a little bit less, I think, certainly in Southeast Asia. And, I'd be interested in other panelists' views as to whether that's something that is gaining traction. But it seems to me that there's, we really are on the cusp of something. This is an opportunity, funds permitting, to really boost economies in the region in a clean and resilient way. The downside is that with fossil fuel prices being a bit lower at the moment, that people could be tempted to sort of try and build dirty fuels, and actually that would be such a bad idea. It would just lock in that sort of dirty fossil fuel investment for decades to come. So it's really important that we use the opportunity now to go for sort of green recovery. And I think the whole development of green finance and sustainable finance is something that will be really important in enabling countries in this region to take forward sustainable investments and infrastructure to support their economies, to support their livelihoods. And I think, as you know, the UK is hosting the COP26 climate talks at the end of next year. And we've got a lot of campaigns about finance and how to improve the flow of finance to sustainable projects whether it's from private finance sources or from development partners and multilateral agencies, but that is obviously going to be key, and we need to do more and better on that. Finally, I did just read a great report that was actually published by the ADB last week, I think, which was entitled 6 Ways to Kickstart a Green Recovery. And I would thoroughly recommend anybody to have a look at that, because that gave some really practical examples of what governments and businesses can think about in terms of having a green recovery. People often sort of talk about green recovery, Green Deal, but when you're not quite sure what they actually mean. But this gave some really good practical examples, which I think would be really helpful. Hope that gives a few ideas.
Great, Camilla. Thank you very much. Anybody else who would like to chip in on this question?
Yeah, Robert, if I may, just very briefly, building back better is something I sincerely believe in, but there are, of course, a lot of skeptics that say, yeah, that sounds great, build back better, as long as you can afford it. It's clear that a lot of countries need help, but hopefully we can, with the help of ADB and other institutions, keep that ethos going and help countries and cities where that's most needed. The second comment is that, as Camilla has pointed out, many sources of clean energy, wind and solar, have become really, really inexpensive and are less expensive at this point than, for example, coal in many places. And so there's just a simple economic argument to stay on the path. And then the third is, I think, the very long view, which we shouldn't forget. If I think about a country like Vietnam, for example, Vietnam is on the path of a decade-long energy transition from coal to LNG, aided by solar and a little bit of wind. And I think many people rightly take the view that COVID-19 is horrible, the economic crisis will be deep, but this too shall pass, and these economic transitions must be made. They're in motion, and they will be completed, albeit with a bit of delay. So just taking the long view.
Yeah, thank you. Thank you. Anybody else? Charles, would you like to chip in on that question?
Actually, yes, I would. I was going to offer a remark there. Just a short time ago, the IEA issued their World Energy Investment Study for 2020, and it's definitely a bit of a hard read because we see investment demand and so forth collapsing all over the world in response not just to the pandemic, but to some other factors in the energy market as well. But there was some good news there. They project GHG emissions to decline around 8%, which is out and away the largest decline since records have been, 1-year decline since records have been kept. But the second is that they're also projecting that output from renewables and investment in renewables will not be affected to the same degree as fossil fuels. In other words, they look better and better, and the reasons that they cite are lower operating costs and preferential access to many power systems. So I count that as good news. And yeah, there is a challenge there when at some point, for example, oil prices were actually negative. They would pay you if you had a place to store it. And some countries obviously did take advantage of these opportunities, purchased a lot of oil. But overall, the message seems to be positive, that the crisis will not. There's another point I would make on a personal level. Maybe as a consequence of, a 50% decline or whatever it is in the global economy, people all over the world are rediscovering how nice clean air is. And in fact, in the US, when many states partially opened up again, people were not going to shopping malls, they were going to the beaches and parks. So I think there's something to go on there. I think there's definitely a positive message in all
this. Thanks, Charles, for your thoughts. Anybody else who would like to chip in?
Yeah, I think I have something to say here, Priyanta.
Yeah, sure.
In fact, yes, we do agree that COVID has impacted the entire world, but that impact in terms of renewable is in positive way. I see it as like we were having a wired system where everything was based on wires, but now we are going wireless. In fact, in renewables also, they are kind of in working in silos, and now we are looking forward for solar irrigation, solarized ventilators, clean cooling, and all this is possible because of renewables. And this is something which the world is looking for. Like Charles said, we should have a long-term view, and renewables is something which is having long legs and which will take us to a next revolution, which we are going to observe in a couple of years.
Along with that, let me put across a question to the whole panel again. Now, all this is very nice, but of course I can leave out the UK because UK is a slightly different story. By the way, I was there when UK went through the whole restructuring process in early 90s or late 80s. So it has advanced a lot. But most of these countries in Asia Pacific region, we are locked with all these monolithic, big inertia utilities. These guys would love traditional planning, integrated planning, centralized planning with all these base load, intermediate, peak load type of plans and the kind of thinking they have traditional. How do you think that we can change these guys to the betterment of the environment or the sustainable development towards more cleaner, energy sector? As you know, I mean, I have been dealing with these guys over these years. It's not that easy. They always come back with something to say. You need this, you need that, and so on. What kind of things what we can do, maybe even in a smaller way, to change these people? Sumit, probably you may have.
Sure.
Yeah.
Thank you, Priyanta. This is an excellent question, and I see it. You're right that still we have that mindset where we just focus on what is there in the past will happen in the future also. But the planning has an important aspect. I mean, with this growing renewables, anyone agrees or not, it is going to come. And idea behind it is like we should go for innovative procurements. So whenever we are doing the planning, we are now thinking about round the clock procurement where we have higher renewable share in the system. And it is happening. Take the example of Chile, where there was a round the clock auction and renewable came first for entire 24/7, where wind as well as solar was as one of the most preferred procurement provider. Similarly, till past we were going with megawatt procurement, but now the time has come for megawatt hour procurement, where we go for a MWH procurement and developers are providing that. So such kind of innovative procurement models based on blocks, based on TOU will be there, and they will be paving the way for the utilities to take it forward.
Thanks. I mean, I would encourage the panelists or the speakers themselves to come up with questions to others. I think that will, be very nice, and particularly when you have less questions from the audience. And yeah, Camilla, anything what you have to add?
Yeah, sure. I mean, I think as Robert said, that one of the key arguments is the economic argument. And when I started this job about 4 years ago, when I was talking about renewables around the region, a lot of the comment that I got was, well, renewables are fine for rich countries. We can't afford them here. But I think the evidence now is just so clear that, you can't afford not to be using renewables, because you're going to end up with an incredibly inefficient, expensive energy mix. So I think that is a key argument. I think particularly in this sort of post-COVID environment, the jobs argument is also really, really useful. And I think there was some evidence from McKinsey's recently that showed the amount of jobs per million that can be created from renewable energy as opposed to fossil fuels, and also in particular energy efficiency. And actually energy efficiency produced more jobs even than renewable energy. So that's another area where we can encourage. And I suppose, there is a tipping point when even the most sort of hard and fast advocates for coal or whatever suddenly look around them and realize that, that horse has bolted and they really need to change. For example, in the UK had canals. That's how we transported all our goods. Nobody uses canals these days because something called, steam power came along and we had trains. But, at one stage, canals were what we used. Obviously, horses and carts going to cars. Again, people in horse and cart days thought that would probably last forever, and then it changed very rapidly. And we are at that point of disruption, I think, now, and that there is a tipping point and people are changing. We need to help that change and make it faster.
I fully agree with you. Actually, here, in that sense, here the leadership matters. That's what should really decide on this. Actually, to go back to your own example, actually, I used to be in the UK during restructuring process, late 80s and early 90s. And at that time, everybody, the CGV at the time, was wondering, I mean, how we can operate the system when it is split up and all that. Now you are doing so well. It's the leadership. You put your foot down and decide, no, this is the way to go forward. So in that sense, what we really need, the leadership in the energy sector or in the governments in our part of the world, in that sense, to put your foot down and decide and move forward. And so I think that's one of the important things. Any other interventions on that question before I move on to something what I have? Or you can ask questions among yourselves.
Yeah, Priyanka, just to reinforce essentially what Camilla said, so just going back to Vietnam, which is a country I've spent quite a bit of time on, particularly on energy, it's clear that the very quickly growing middle class in Vietnam does not want to put up with coal anymore. They see what pollution arises from the growing use of coal to fuel a very quickly growing economy, and it's just no longer acceptable. So not to say that the mix or the base load of the energy mix will just go one night to another into clean and renewable energy entirely. Coal needs to be phased out, and LNG will come in its place as sort of a base load fuel, which is also not the cleanest, but certainly cleaner than coal. But I think it pairs up with the growing middle classes in Asia. And there again, I think a COVID-19 pandemic and economic crisis does not take away that sentiment on the part of growing middle classes that coal must be part of history, because the pollution is a huge negative factor in quality of life and health.
Yeah. So if I put across another question which came from the audience, it seemed that we have not touched upon too much on energy efficiency side. Any thoughts about energy efficiency, what role it can play in this whole game of resilience, managing resilience and the clean energy sector? Any inputs from you? Anybody?
Yeah, sure. So I'll take up this question.
Yeah, please.
Like I was mentioning in my presentation, renewables and energy efficiency DSM go hand in hand. I mean, these are two kind of drivers which are actually going to pave the way. We now have demand response where we can shift the peaks. And it is happening, like I mentioned in Karnataka, they have shifted the entire load during the solar generation time. It is again a kind of a DSM measure. So energy efficiency is definitely going to play the role at the demand side, but at the supply side, it is the renewables which are getting cheaper. And like Camilla said, that it is purely economics. So we have these two arrows in our back, and we can utilize them to take the things forward in a much more economical and sustainable way, which these monolithic utilities were not till now having. So I think that is something which is definitely going to play a role.
And also on the supply side, I presume the very fact that you go distributed generation itself will bring down the supply side efficiency, I suppose, increase efficiency because of less transmission and distribution losses and so on.
Absolutely.
Yeah.
Okay, Priyanka, can I interject?
Yeah, please. Please.
In terms of energy efficiency, the last statement in my presentation was that energy efficiency actually can affect positively all the components of the trilemma. And there you can actually resolve the trilemma by emphasizing energy efficiency. I was also going to point out the importance of leadership. You mentioned that. But apart from the choice of the Department of Energy Secretary, what is needed actually is also to address the problem of information asymmetry, not the positive effects of renewables actually is not well known. That's why we still have resistance from many sectors. That's it.
Any other interventions on that before I go for the next question?
Just to print on energy efficiency, I remember the main takeaway of ACEF 2019 was that if we do a very good job on energy efficiency comprehensively, that would actually be a bigger opportunity to leave a cleaner planet for our children and grandchildren, or perhaps clean energy or renewable energy. But it seems that the issue is this needs to be financed. it needs to be financed, and then it needs to be paid back out of the savings that are being created out of the energy efficiency. And there isn't really yet sort of a good and solid template for banks to use. Actually, it's a blended finance template very often. And I think here innovation is sort of the enemy of progress. You know, you're much better off sometimes using, you know, coming up with a financing structure and replicating it because it works, rather than trying to innovate and find some new ways of doing the same thing. So much better to just take something that works, scale it up, replicate it, and don't continue to find, you know, the better solution for it. Just do it quickly and have a much bigger impact on energy efficiency. So I think it's a financing template that is still missing.
Thanks.
I would completely agree with that.
Yeah, please, Camilla.
Yeah,
go ahead.
sorry. I completely agree with that. And the development program that I've mentioned as well as Green Finance, we're also working on energy efficiency, looking at standards across the region, for example, but also looking at energy efficiency financing. And, you know, if we can crack that, I think that will be really good. I also think that, you know, traditionally energy efficiency has been the slight sort of orphan in terms of the way we look at reducing emissions, but yet there's just so much we can do in this region. I think I read somewhere that you could reduce emissions by 30% or whatever if you actually put into place all the energy efficiency measures that there are out there already. But I think that it is growing. There is a growing interest in energy efficiency, and I think it also speaks to the growing understanding of the sort of circular economy as well, and the sort of the need for all of us to be sort of more sustainable, whether it's, you know, individually in our households, in our businesses, in our streets, in our cities. And I think that energy efficiency, you know, more at a local level is something that's going to be improving in the coming years in this region too. Thanks.
Thank you very much for that intervention. In fact, you know, we have a great example in India. They have set up the central institution called Energy Efficiency Services Limited under the government, and they are going in a massive scale all with energy efficiency programs. And yeah, the emphasis is increasingly coming in, and countries are realizing that. Another question probably to Sumedh, again, on you know, this perception of grid stability and all that when all these intermittent sources coming in, and particularly now the demand going down, and so the baseload, so-called baseload plants are kind of part loaded and so on, and more renewables coming in, and the share of renewables against what is required to supply this demand it goes up, and the grid stability issue. And what do you think of that? And do you think it's an issue and we have technology to address this? What do you think?
So right now, still we have, to be very frank, the capabilities for grid integration has to be developed within the utility professionals. Yes, there is an intermittency of renewables which has to be taken care, and it can only be taken care when we understand demand in a much more granular way. What till now what we were doing was, or till now, till date, we are just focusing on the short-term demand, that is a day ahead. Okay, what would be my demand tomorrow? I will just focus on that and accordingly try to meet it. But with the softwares which we are developing and much better information like smart meters and all, you actually can have that granular level of demand details which will be available to you. And that becomes a very important data set with which you can actually play and understand what kind of supply side resources are needed to meet that demand. And actually we have done that, and we have seen that intermittency issues resolved in that fashion. So what I'm trying to bring here point is that it is purely data. The better data you have, the better response you can make. Until now, with the utilities, we don't have that level of data in detail, because of which they miss that kind of buzz. So if that data is started pouring in because of smart meters, because of more better interventions with softwares, then definitely that issue of intermittency will also resolve.
Thanks. Any questions from the panelists themselves to others, or anything what you would like to bring up before I come up with another question?
This is Charles, and this is directly to Sumedh, but I would enjoy hearing from others as well. You're describing a planning framework, and as recent events showed us, you know, we can be in the near term dramatically wrong in our assumptions for reasons that we can't possibly predict in our models and so forth. But even beyond that, And I think an unfortunate consequence of all these recent events is the climate change itself has sort of receded into the background as a concern in people's minds, but believe me, it's still there. And it introduces a kind of a veil of uncertainty over future conditions. Now, how would you propose to construct a planning framework that takes useful account of both long-term uncertainty and the potential for, and I would argue, the increasing potential for unforeseen shocks to the system? Do you or any of the other panelists have any thoughts along these lines?
Right. I mean, this is a star question, Charles. Thanks for asking. So, with our experience, when we were doing a lot of study before we actually were coming up with this model and software, we found that utilities still now only go till the level of scenario analysis, and then they don't do sensitivity and probabilistic planning, which is very much needed in this uncertain world. So the sensitivity analysis is done with key parameters, which are economic parameters, which are impacting, and then you do a utilizing Monte Carlo or MILP methods, that what kind of probable options you can emerge with, and that utilities were not doing till now. So that's what I was also trying to mention in my presentation, that risk and uncertainty management has to be there and it has to be taken care. Planning is something till now which we were doing and we were keeping it as a plan, but plan has to be updated every 2 years, and that is what is needed, because then only you will be in a better position to understand the uncertainties which are going to take forward the near future. So this is something which is very important, and I hope this is what you are trying to ask.
Yeah. So we have only 4 minutes to go. I would invite the panelists to quickly, make a point. Anything what can be used as a takeaway from this session. One statement from each of you, starting from Sumit, let's say.
Okay, thank you, Priyanta. It was excellent moderation from you, and also the panel members who have really put valued inputs in this particular session. To me, I'm very clear that future is clear and coordinates point toward high admittance of renewable energy. So challenge is both to the regulators and the utility who are not equipped with how to manage this RE dominated portfolio. And they have to come to a common agreement that there is a price to pay if we are not resilient. And so disruption is evident, and it is high time that utilities, you and me, are able to build our capabilities so that challenging time does not take us out.
Thank you.
We, in fact, become more resilient on that.
Joseph, what can you say? What is the takeaway from you?
I just want to paraphrase from the immediate past president of Ateneo University when he said that you cannot build effectively if you don't build with nature. Right? We have to build along with nature. Yeah. Thank you.
Thank you. Thanks a lot. Camilla?
Thank you. I don't have a great quote, but I would just go back to the economic argument that's increasingly strong, and that's going to be the way forward for a resilient world. Thanks.
What can you say? What can be the last statement you can make? I think you are muted. You can. Yeah. You are still muted, I think.
Yeah. In my opinion, because of the COVID-19, social distance can be kept. Maybe it is a need for local food. So I think solar panel can empower the local agriculture and food storage. Maybe the more need for food storage. Okay.
Thank you very much. Robert?
I would say now is a great time to scale up blended finance in support of clean and renewable energy and energy efficiency. I would say for ACEF 2021, I would suggest ADB consider including the circular economy into the program.
Good, excellent. Jas, over to you.
Okay. I guess just to recap a lot of what we've heard and to reflect back on the theme of this session, that the way the technology looks is actually very good. The costs are coming down, deployment is expanding and so forth. But we can't neglect the management, the policy, the regulatory side. We heard a little bit about this from each of our presenters, I think, in a way. We can't lose focus on that because it's probably the most rapid payoff we can make as an investment in terms of turning the performance of our systems around to get people to think differently about how they're doing this. And we can see gains in the very short run and at relatively low cost.
Thank you. Thanks a lot, Joss. And here we are. We did a great job in this discussion, and I'm sure we covered most of the things, but we want to discuss managing resilience is so critical when it comes to improving resilience in the energy sector and towards a more cleaner energy sector for the new generations to come. Thank you very much to all of you for the excellent presentations and the interventions, and of course the panel discussion. Thank you very much.